Well, now that 2023 is over, I think I should share that I broke a personal record. I saw more movies in theaters in 2023 than any other year of my life. Growing up, I only ever went to a theater 1 or 2 times a year, but as I've gotten older, not only have I grown to appreciate it more, but I can also now drive myself and pay for my own tickets. I saw a whopping 13 new movies in theaters last year, and including re-releases, I saw 18. Some with friends, some with family, and some just by myself. It was really cool, and that's also why I started doing more reviews on this channel. So I thought it would be fun to look back at all the new movies I saw last year. Not only can I reflect on everything, but I can also go a bit more in depth, mention some movies I didn't get a chance to review, or see if my opinion has changed. Although I'm limiting this to 2023 movies only, so re-releases and stuff that came out in late 2022 don't count. But I will also throw in any new streaming movies I saw as well. And at the end, I'll rank them all from worst to best. Also, yeah, I know it's kinda late in the year to be doing a 2023 retrospective, but in my defense, I've been busy. I'm gonna be going in order of when I saw them, not in order of release, and there will be some spoilers along the way, so you've been warned. With that, this is every new movie I saw in 2023.
This is lava!
Cocaine Bear is one of the best delivering movies I have ever seen. There is cocaine, there is a bear, and those things do connect, so it provides what it promises. Honestly, there isn't that much to say about this movie. The best way to describe it is Evil Dead, but with a CGI bear. It's dumb, cheesy, over-the-top fun. It knows exactly what it is, and it doesn't try to be anything more. It gives you what you would expect from a movie with this title. The actors all do a decent job. The bear looks fake, but that honestly makes it funnier. There is legit good writing in here. The plot is nothing amazing, but you're not really here for that. You're here for the bear. And admittedly, the only scene that really goes all the way is the ambulance chase. I was laughing my ass off during that scene. Aside from that, the movie's alright. Nothing great, but still a decent watch if you're curious. Now we just need to wait for the sequel, Heron Wolf.
It's me. Mario.
The Mario movie honestly might have been the most fun movie I saw last year. Not the best, but if you ask me which one was the most entertaining overall, I might say this one. I was smiling throughout 90% of this movie. It was just pure joy from beginning to end. As someone who's been a huge fan of Mario for most of his life, hell, Mario Kart Double Dash was the first video game I ever played, and Super Mario Odyssey is probably my favorite game of all time. This movie was an absolute love letter to the series. Sure, it's not super serious or emotional, but it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be a fun adventure through the Mario universe, and it nails it. This movie is basically an animated popcorn flick. The animation is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, this is easily the best looking movie Illumination has ever given us, and that's actually saying a lot. Their movies generally look good. The writing is top tier. This movie is freaking hilarious. The action scenes are super entertaining. And there are so many Easter eggs, it is impossible to see them all on your first viewing. I know everyone was confused at the voice cast when it was announced, but it ended up being better than most people expected. Jack Black as Bowser was easily the highlight. I was laughing hysterically during that amazing song that totally got snubbed for an Oscar nomination. Chris Pratt was decent enough as Mario, Charlie Day was a really good Luigi, Anya Taylor-Joy was a pretty solid Peach, Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong was Seth Rogen, okay, he was probably the weakest of the main six, and Keegan-Michael Key was a surprisingly good Toad. The only one I didn't like, weirdly enough, was Fred Armisen as Cranky Kong. I have no idea what they were trying to do here. He's supposed to be a grouchy old man, not a drunk surfer.
Now, since I want this fight to last more than 5 seconds, I put power-ups around the arena.
On top of that, this movie could have used a bit more fleshing out, and some of the music choices were weird, but the good moments totally made up for it. Hopefully the sequel can help with that kind of stuff. I had so much fun with this. It might not be a masterpiece compared to most modern animated movies, but it is a masterpiece compared to the live-action Mario movie.
I don't say blah blah blah.
Renfield is a movie I chose not to review earlier because I honestly didn't have much to say about it. Not because it's bad, I thought it was good, but it's nothing mind-blowing either. The plot following Dracula's assistant who wants to quit but fears he'll get murdered is a pretty solid one. There is some good writing in this movie, the characters are decent enough, and all of the actors are really solid. Honestly, I was surprised at how good the action scenes were. The effects, while nothing spectacular, are still really good, and it gets super gory at times. I mean, this can give Mortal Kombat a run for its money. My only complaint really is I thought the ending was a bit of a cop-out, but it does lead to a really great joke during the credits, so I can excuse it. But of course, I've saved the best thing about this movie for last. Dracula himself, played by the one and only Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage is one of those actors that just instantly makes a movie better, especially when he goes big. And my god, does he go big in this movie. It's been a while since he did a role like this, and you can tell he is having the time of his life. He just steals the show in every scene he's in. He is absolutely hilarious, but also legit creepy at times. He's without a doubt the highlight of this flick. This man is a national treasure. Aside from that, the movie's pretty standard. It's honestly pretty much the same as Cocaine Bear, only instead of a CGI bear, it has Nicolas Cage. So that means Renfield is better.
The name's Rocket. Rocket raccoon.
Now this is a movie I wanted to review, I just never got around to it. Superhero movies had a rough time last year, and that's being generous, but the only live-action one that actually did well both critically and commercially was Guardians 3. And as someone who enjoys the first Guardians movie and loves the second, I think this was a great way to end it. It's a lot heavier, especially with the emphasis on Rocket's backstory, but since this is supposed to be a send-off, I think it works. It still has the same type of humor as the other movies, with great dialogue, wonderful characters, and just the right amount of stupidity. And it doesn't go overboard with the comedy like a lot of other recent Marvel movies. They know when to tone it down, and even when they don't, it ends up working. There were multiple times where I thought a joke went on too long, and then it ended up making me laugh again. I really like what they did with the characters, and they all got great send-offs. Drax, Groot, and Nebula are as good as ever. Star-Lord and Gamora's relationship really has this feeling of tragedy to it, which I think works, especially with what happens to Star-Lord at the end, and this movie made me realize just how much I love Mantis. She is honestly the funniest character in the movie. And of course, Rocket speaks for himself. His backstory is one of the most engaging and heartbreaking things the MCU has ever done. And it really works. You know how it's gonna end, despite how much you desperately don't want it to. While I like this movie more than the first movie, I still think the second one is the best, as I have two issues with this. One is the runtime. I think you could have cut about 10 minutes. And the other is the villain. The High Evolutionary is basically the opposite of Ronan from the first movie. Ronan was completely generic and not interesting at all, but he took everything super seriously, which contrasted how silly the rest of the movie was, making things like Star-Lord challenging him to a dance battle absolutely hilarious. The High Evolutionary, on the other hand, is legit interesting. He's a maniac scientist with a god complex who seeks to create a perfect society and deems even one single flaw a failure that must be destroyed. That's actually really unique, and something Marvel's never really done before. He could have been a great villain, but the problem is...
You're an abomination! Alright, P13, how dare you think you are more?
He never stops screaming. I swear 99% of his dialogue is just yelling, and it gets really annoying really fast. I felt like I was watching Eddie Redmayne in Jupiter Ascending. But other than that, I really liked this movie. It was funny, engaging, emotional, and surprisingly very adult. Not only because of its hairier story and gruesome imagery, but it also has the first official MCU F-bomb, and I don't know if it was wasted or not. Marvel certainly had a rough time last year, but I'm glad this was here to remind people it wasn't all bad. Now let's just hope Deadpool and Wolverine can bring things back a bit.
I love chai tea. What did you just say? Chai tea? Chai means tea, bro.
Honestly, what can I say about this movie that everyone else hasn't already said? It's amazing. The animation in this movie is honestly some of the best I've ever seen in my life. It is visual overload in the best way possible. Every single frame could be hung in a museum. The amount of detail and little things going on is absolutely insane. The animators did an absolutely outstanding job. Let's just hope those alleged working conditions improve. And this movie is able to blend so many styles absolutely perfectly. Much like the previous Spider-Verse film, the variety in terms of different universes we see is mind-blowing. There are so many creative worlds in here, and unlike the last movie, we actually get to see them. I knew this movie was going to be something special when I saw the title doesn't appear until over 10 minutes in. Like all this cool, crazy stuff you saw that could have been an Oscar-winning short film, that was just the beginning. We still have tons of amazing characters, some returning from the first movie like Miles, Peter, and Gwen, as well as some fantastic new ones like Jess, Hobby, Miguel, and of course, the Spot, who is quite possibly the greatest villain in any Spider-Man movie, with the best backstory in cinema history. This movie is an absolute love letter to Spider-Man. Not only does it throw in tons of references, callbacks, and Easter eggs, but it is hilarious and able to connect so many pieces of media together. I do still kind of prefer the first movie though, since it had a much tighter story. This one is still really good, but I can see some people being a little confused, and the whole canon event idea isn't fully explained. But I'll wait until the next one comes out to make my final decision, since I assume they're gonna expand on that more. At the very least, the idea does bring up a very interesting dilemma on whether or not you should sacrifice one person for the greater good. Either way, I'm being super nitpicky with that just because I hold this movie to such a high standard. While I had a few small issues, I absolutely loved this movie. There's a reason everyone went bonkers when it came out, and it's one of the very rare examples of praise carrying a sequel's success more than box office of the last film. Really looking forward to Beyond the Spider-Verse whenever that comes out. Is there a new release date yet? Doesn't look like it. If there's any movie that deserves its time to cook, it's this one, so I can wait, and I'm sure the animators can too.
Water, earth, fire, air.
Elemental was one of the more divisive movies of last year. I don't know anyone that loves this movie, but I don't know anyone that hates it either. Most people either like it fine, don't like it, or are just pretty indifferent to it. Personally, I'm kinda mixed on it. I actually rewatched it recently since I decided to do a marathon of every Pixar movie, and I was curious to see if my opinion on it changed. Yeah, not really. I'll admit some parts of this movie got a bit better, but some got a bit worse. The story is by far its weakest element. It's very basic, very predictable, and while it isn't just the elements don't mix thing many people were worried about, it's more about Ember deciding if she wants to run the shop or not. That still isn't done amazingly well. I know a lot of this movie is based on the director's real-life experience, and that's cool, but I think they could have done a bit more to make it stand out. It's not awful, but it's pretty standard. We've seen this type of story before, and it doesn't really add anything new. The characters are also a mixed bag. Ember is really the only one that stands out to me. It's not easy to make a character that's short-tempered without being annoying, but you really do see her struggling with her emotions and figuring out what she wants versus what she feels like she needs to do, and I like that. Wade is... I do like how he helps Ember learn to open up more and how optimistic he is, but the constant crying gets old pretty fast. It leads to a couple of good moments, but it can also be pretty annoying. Everyone else isn't awful, they're just kinda there. Ember and Wade's chemistry seems to be the most divisive part of this movie. People either really like it or don't care at all. Personally, I think it's fine. They aren't one of the best Pixar couples, but I do buy they really care about each other, and I really like the song that plays during their date montage. The writing in this movie honestly got a bit better on rewatch. It's still not amazing, but I did get more laughs on my second watch than I did on my first. But without a doubt, the best thing about this movie is the animation. This is one of Pixar's best looking movies ever. So much detail went into each of the characters' designs, how they move, the little particle effects, it all just looks beautiful. And the most mixed thing about this movie for me is the world building. Element City is pretty generic. There's a couple of neat things, but for the most part, this is a very basic looking city. And the focus is super unbalanced. We get tons of details for the fire people, a decent amount for the water people, a little for the air people, and almost nothing for the earth people. But what we do get, especially for the fire people, is super cool. From the way they move, to the things they eat, to what they can do, especially the glass making is awesome, to even the little things like their clothes being made of glass, which I didn't even notice at first. The thing I'm most conflicted on, though, is Ember and Wade being able to touch. On the one hand, I like that they keep it kind of vague, like it could mean multiple things, but on the other hand, I think the idea of a couple that can't physically touch each other is a legit really good idea. I think there's some interesting things you could have done with that, like have it be an allegory for long-distance relationships, or an asexual couple, or just a couple that expresses their love in different ways. But that's not where they go. They can just touch, which isn't awful, but I think there's some missed potential here. But I tried to judge movies based on what they are and not what they could be, and as it stands, this movie's alright. It's far from one of the best Pixar movies, but it's also not one of the worst.
Don't touch that dial now, we're just getting started.
Well, this movie sure happened. Yeah, this is a movie I don't think anyone was really asking for, except for the people that made it. Crystal Skull was already really divisive, but this one everyone seemed to agree on, and not in a good way. This is by far the most disliked entry in the series, and I do technically agree, but I don't think this movie was as bad as people said it was. Honestly, I kept going back and forth on whether or not I liked it, because there's some really good stuff in it, and some really bad stuff. The story is not particularly gripping, as the dial isn't an amazing treasure, and the villain is probably the most generic in the series. I think killing off Mutt and having Indy and Marion break up off-screen was pretty disappointing, but thankfully it does lead to a nice moment between them at the end. And the pacing of this movie is pretty lousy. This did not need to be a 2.5-hour movie because some parts drag. But Indy is still a very likable character, and while it was unnecessary, it is kinda nice to see him go on one last adventure in his old age. He feels like a tire-out old man trying to recapture his youth, and honestly, I think that's not a bad idea. I thought Helena was a decent enough sidekick for Indy to bring, since she's pretty interesting being a con woman, and the actress brings a lot of charm to the role. The effects were much better than Crystal Skull, and there were some fun moments, with the car chase scene easily being the best part of the movie. And while the story wasn't amazing, I did want to see where it was going. Honestly, I was prepared to write this movie off at the end, as I think Indy staying in the past would have been a really horrible ending, but thankfully they don't go that route. I do question why it was even brought up, but whatever. I wasn't really sure if I liked this movie or not, but in the end, I think there was just enough good stuff to make me say, I'm glad I saw it. This movie didn't need to exist, but for what it is, I think it's totally watchable. Definitely the weakest of the Indiana Jones movies, but it's a serviceable enough ending to one of the most iconic adventure series ever made. Just a shame it cost so much to make, otherwise they might have actually turned a profit.
Release the Kraken!
Alright, we're just gonna do a little bit of copy and paste and boom, done. Honestly, I find it really interesting that Elemental and Ruby Gillman came out in the same month because both movies are really similar in terms of strengths and weaknesses. Both have gorgeous animation. I mean, this movie looks so much better than it should. Really distinct character designs, a pretty underwhelming story, fairly hit or miss writing, and not great characters aside from a few exceptions, particularly the leads. They also got fairly similar reception and had one of the worst openings in the studio's history, but the difference is one studio had faith in the movie while the other certainly did not. This is actually the second lowest grossing DreamWorks movie ever made, behind Spirit Untamed. Admit it, you had no idea that was a thing. But box office doesn't always equate to quality, and I don't think this is one of the worst DreamWorks movies ever, but it's not one of their best either. I've seen a lot of mixed opinions on this movie thrown around, but none of them have been very passionate. Most people seem fairly indifferent, or they don't like it, but they don't hate it either, or they like it, but they don't love it. I think I had more faith in this movie than most people because DreamWorks has always been very inconsistent. Hell, everyone thought Kung Fu Panda was gonna suck, and it's one of the best DreamWorks movies ever. And sadly, that wasn't really the case with Ruby Gillman. The story is super generic. There are so many cliches in here, it's almost laughable. The awkward teen who wants to fit in, but she has to hide something that gets revealed. There's a cool new girl who's so obviously evil, even the trailer didn't try to hide it. You've got generic pop songs that aren't awful, but they are super forgettable, and a lot of the writing is really hit or miss. But I actually think this movie has more good stuff than people realize. For starters, like I said, the animation is beautiful. I mean, look at these underwater scenes. The lighting and the colors look absolutely amazing. If there's anyone who tried hard with this movie, it was the animators. I also really like the art style. That seems to be the most divisive thing about this movie, but I personally enjoy it. Some characters look a little weird, but for the most part, I like how expressive and kind of rubbery they can be. For years, almost every DreamWorks movie had the exact same style, but it's nice to see them experiment more with the bad guys, Puss in Boots, and now this. And while there are a ton of cliches in here, there are a few that they switch up a bit. For starters, I like how the boy Ruby likes isn't just the generic cool guy. He's also kind of an oddball, which makes it feel a bit more believable. I thought the dynamic between Ruby and her mother was pretty good. It could have easily been one's right, the other's wrong, but you do see the connection they have and where both characters are coming from. While she's nothing really unique, I did think Ruby was a likable enough protagonist. She's kind of the opposite of other creatures posing as human characters, where instead of starting in the ocean and going on land, she starts on land and goes to the ocean. Even just the little things like the way she moves or her little mannerisms were a really nice touch and make her feel way more like a real teenager. Even some of the stuff I didn't think I would like, I ended up enjoying. We meet the ship captain early on who tries to hunt her down, and I thought he would be really annoying, but he's honestly the funniest character in the movie. He had some really great lines, and I love his little crab sidekick. I think this movie would have been a lot better if they focused more on the Kraken stuff, really flesh out this undersea world, give us more cool stuff to see, tell us more about her grandmother and her uncle. I honestly think this could have been a really cool movie if they just took more risks with the story. I saw a lot of people suggest Chelsea should have actually been the villain's daughter, like she said, instead of just the main villain, and she has to struggle with listening to her mother or forming an actual friendship with Ruby, and I agree, that would have been a lot more interesting. But sadly, she ends up being not an awful villain, but not a great one either. This movie had a lot of potential that it sadly didn't reach. As it stands, I think this movie's alright. I get why people don't like it, but I'm glad I saw it. I think it could really benefit from a sequel, but given the terrible box office and middling reception, I find that very unlikely. Who knows? DreamWorks movies almost always become meme generators. Maybe this one will be too.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
You know, I think I'm one of the only people that saw the second half of Oppenheimer and not the first. If you're wondering why I didn't see Barbie, I just didn't really have an interest. Not because it looked bad or I didn't agree with the politics, it just didn't seem like my thing. Maybe I'll watch it someday, but for now I'm good. Oppenheimer, on the other hand, this is a movie I was interested in. I don't have that much experience with Christopher Nolan films, but the ones I do have are mixed to say the least. The Dark Knight is one of my absolute favorite movies of all time. I freaking love this movie, and my family dragged me to see Dunkirk, which I did not like. I don't really like war movies, and that didn't do anything to stand out to me. But with that said, Oppenheimer was really damn good. This movie really feels like a Nolan film, as it's a prime example of his two defining character traits: heavy exposition dialogue and non-linear storytelling. The film primarily hops between three key points in history: the process of Oppenheimer developing the atomic bomb, a meeting after the war discussing his connection to the communism, and a trial held against him by Louis Strauss. And while there are a few times that can be a bit confusing, for the most part I was able to follow it fine. Of course, it goes without saying, the acting in this movie is absolutely phenomenal. Every single one of these actors is giving it their all, and the writing is just as fantastic. This is a legit, fascinating story, and it's told in a very engaging way. Without a doubt, the best part of the movie is the scene where they set off the bomb. Everything about this entire sequence is done perfectly. From the pacing, to the writing, to the acting, and of course, the incredible effect. You seriously feel the weight of this explosion, and you realize just how powerful this kind of weapon really is. It might be my favorite scene in any movie I saw this year, one of my favorite movie moments ever. And while I do really like how it actually goes in depth about the aftermath of the bomb and the ethics of using something so destructive, it sadly leads to the film's biggest issue: the runtime. This is a 3-hour movie, and for the most part, I got through it fine, but I was getting pretty antsy towards the end. The third act is great and really important, but I think some parts could have been trimmed down. But aside from that, this movie's fantastic. This is the only movie I saw this year that was nominated for Best Picture, and let me tell you, it earned it. While it's not my personal favorite of the year, this movie was epic.
But I'm not a girl. I'm a shark.
The only streaming movie I saw last year, Nimona, is a ton of fun. Disney made a very stupid decision canceling this, but thankfully it lived on through the power of Netflix. For starters, I absolutely love this world they made. The combination of fantasy and sci-fi is extremely cool, really works with the theming, and these super different styles blend in a really awesome way. The story is really interesting. I like how it subverts expectations in a good way. The mystery of who the villain is revealed pretty early on, and I really like that because it's very easy to figure out and they don't drag on with it to make it a big surprise later. While the animation can look a little too simple as there aren't that many details and textures, it is still really good. The character expressions are fantastic and the action scenes are awesome, especially the prison escape. That was probably the best part of the movie. The characters are all super likable. Ballister is a really compelling protagonist. You do feel bad for him because of the situation he's placed in, and you really want to see him succeed. His boyfriend is also pretty likable. You can identify with the struggle he's going through and how he feels conflicted and just wants to figure everything out. But of course, the highlight is easily Nimona herself. She is just completely unhinged. From her expressions to her dialogue to her thirst for blood, occasionally she can get a bit annoying, but for the most part, she is hilarious. Also, Chloe Grace Moretz does a fantastic job voicing her. This movie also gets surprisingly dark for a kids film. There are some places I really did not expect it to go, and it kinda shocked me, but in a good way. Sadly, I do have a few issues. I think the villain could have used a little more focus. She wasn't awful, but she did feel kinda bland. And while this movie does subvert a lot of cliches in the beginning, the third act is kinda predictable and underwhelming, with the exception of one moment, which I won't spoil because it is the most emotional part of the movie. But I will say they do something that so many other animated movies do, and for a second I thought they might do something different and go all the way, but no. Literally the very last second before the credits, they do it, and it literally happens off screen. But those are my only problems. This is an awesome movie. I'm really glad I watched it, and I'm even more glad it was given another chance. Eat your heart out, Disney, because this movie left you in the dust. Don't worry, we'll get to them in a minute.
Was that the bike of 87?
Oh, Five Nights at Freddy's, how not interesting you were. This movie was really divisive among critics and audiences, but I'm gonna have to be a bit pretentious and go with the critics on this one. Now, before you die-hard FNAF fans kill me, I don't think this movie is terrible. For one thing, the atmosphere is fantastic. The shots and lighting they use in the pizza parlor is done really well. It feels straight out of the 80s and has a super creepy vibe to it. The animatronics are great. They look just like the games, and the puppetry on them is incredible, which isn't surprising since the Jim Henson Company worked on it. The acting is also pretty good for the most part. You can tell these actors are giving it their all with the material they're given, again, for the most part, even if said material isn't all too great. Okay, let's get into the problems with this movie now. Regardless of your thoughts on this movie, I think we can all agree on one major flaw that absolutely kills it for most people, myself included. The pacing is awful. 90% of this movie is just the characters standing around and talking, and on top of that, this movie is basically juggling 4 plot points at once. Mike watching his sister, Mike working his job where the animatronics come to life, or at least they should be, the missing children from the 80s that got the place shut down, and Mike having dreams to figure out who took his brother when he was young. And boy, do these plot points not mesh very well. These are all good ideas on paper, but in my opinion, they put focus on the wrong ones. About 40 minutes into the movie, Mike's aunt sends some teens to wreck the place, and then we finally get our first scene of the animatronics coming to life and killing people. And it's great. It's well shot, well paced, it's both funny and creepy, and the deaths are really creative. It feels like the games. This is what I wanted out of a Five Nights at Freddy's movie. The problem is, that is the only scene where this actually happens. After that, we just go right back to talking. And while the story is mildly interesting, that's not the only thing we're here for. We want to see the animatronics doing creepy stuff, and we only really get one scene of that. On top of that, some of the other scenes just aren't well done. Not only are the supposed reveals kinda underwhelming, like, no joke, I had no idea this was supposed to be Golden Freddy. It looks exactly the same as regular Freddy, but a lot of moments feel really out of place. When Mike, Abby, and Vanessa were building a fort with the animatronics, I thought to myself, are we really doing this? Is this what you'd expect from a FNAF movie? And then Vanessa just snaps at Mike almost completely out of nowhere. Thankfully, the movie picks up a bit in the third act, but at that point for me, it was too little too late. Again, I didn't hate this movie, as there were some good things, but overall, I didn't have a very good time with it. And I'm not alone, as all of my friends that also saw it were not fans. If you like it, great, more power to you. The audience I saw it with seemed to have a much better time than me and my friend. When people say this movie is for fans, that doesn't mean people who like playing the games. It means people who enjoy binging game theory videos and dissecting the lore of the series. And sadly, I am not one of those people, so it didn't really do much for me. Honestly, if it had just 1 or 2 more scenes of the animatronics doing stuff, I think I would have liked this film okay enough, but unfortunately, that's not what we got.
You're gonna grant me any 3 wishes I want, right?
If you told me that all 5 major American animation studios released a movie in 1 year, and the general ranking of reception went Sony at the top, then Illumination, then Pixar, then DreamWorks, and then Disney at the bottom, I would not have believed you. But wow, did Disney really drop the ball with their 100-year celebration. Just... what the hell happened here? I honestly thought this movie had a lot of potential when I saw the trailer, but then it opened with a 62% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is really low by Disney standards, and then it just kept going down and down. It is now the 3rd lowest rated Disney movie ever, behind Brother Bear and Chicken Little. I know Rotten Tomatoes isn't always reliable, but it's usually biased towards Disney movies, so the fact that it did this bad was not a good sign at all. And yeah, it's warranted, because this movie is a hot mess. It's supposed to be an homage to Disney's long history, and it does not do that well at all. For starters, the characters are super generic. Asha does nothing to stand out from other Disney protagonists. The star is kinda cute, but he's not very memorable. The goat is one of the most unfunny comic relief characters Disney has ever made, and that's saying a lot. And wow, does King Magnifico not work as a villain. It feels like they didn't know whether to make him more complex and sympathetic like recent Disney villains, or cartoony and irredeemable like older ones. So we get this weird mashup that does not work at all. He starts out possibly interesting, and then in a single scene, he becomes completely insane. Now, I will admit, this isn't the worst movie Disney's ever made. I know the animation gets a lot of backlash, but I think it's alright. Sure, it's not as pretty or colorful as other Disney movies, but I think it still looks decent enough. And I know this is an unpopular opinion, I thought the songs were decent. Okay, the lyrics aren't very good, but they have decent melodies, and they're sung pretty well. I did find a couple of them getting stuck in my head. I didn't listen to them again afterwards, but they weren't awful. The real problem with the songs is that they pretty much come out of nowhere. And I think the story does have potential, but they don't do anything with it. The people giving up their wishes doesn't seem to affect them that much, and character motivations constantly change, so this movie doesn't have any focus. On top of that, it's filled with references to other Disney movies, and they are not clever. They just feel incredibly forced and distracting. Asha has 7 friends that all act like the 7 dwarves, and there's no reason whatsoever. There's no connection, no explanation, no payoff, nothing. And they aren't memorable either. Okay, the grumpy one has a couple of funny lines, and the bashful one has a kinda decent running joke about how she'll just disappear, and then they'll ask, how does she do that? That got a few chuckles, but that's it. They also reference stuff like Peter Pan, Cinderella, and even Mary Poppins, and once again, there is no reason. It doesn't feel clever, it just feels lazy. Like I said, there were a few decent jokes and some solid moments, but for the most part, this movie feels cluttered, unfocused, and it's just disappointing. It feels less like a celebration for Disney the studio, and more like a celebration for Disney the company, and that's not worth celebrating. I think the hate this movie got was a little overblown. Like, I've heard people say it was written by AI, and I find that highly unlikely, but it was by far the worst animated movie I saw this year. Okay, I think that's enough from America. Let's see what Japan's been up to.
It's a bird! It's a bird! It's a bird!
Now we're talking. I don't have that much experience with Studio Ghibli films, or Ghibli, however it's pronounced. The only other one I've seen is Princess Mononoke, but after how awesome both that and Boy and the Heron are, I really need to check out more. This is another movie I didn't get a chance to do a review of since I didn't have time, but I can tell you right now, this is amazing. I don't really know where to start, so I'll just go with the most obvious, the animation. Even by Ghibli standards, this movie looks incredible. It's so fluid and so vibrant. There's such a wide variety of colors and landscapes, and it's just amazing to look at. And thankfully, we have a fantastic story to back it up. I don't know why this seemed to be a year for post-World War II movies, but this one really stands out. We follow a young boy named Mahito who's struggling with the loss of his mother and is forced to move in with his new stepmother. But when she goes missing, he comes across a large talking heron who takes him to a mysterious new world to find her. The world building in this is some of the best I've ever seen in an animated movie. The variety of unique creatures and characters that come across is outstanding. There's so much creativity in this movie, it is unbelievable. It's both very abstract and very familiar. There's some stuff we can easily recognize, and there's other stuff that's super unique and imaginative. So you never really know what you're gonna see next. The characters are also crazy likable. They're all very endearing, engaging, and funny. The heron is hilarious. I love the design of him switching between a bird and human form. The way they do it is so delightfully weird. Mahito is a very compelling protagonist, as you really identify with his struggle, and despite his mixed feelings towards his stepmother, he still pushes on to save her. I should also say I watched the dub for this movie, and the voice acting was phenomenal. I mean, this is an absolutely stacked cast, and all of them do an amazing job. This movie is genuinely so complex and has so many layers to it that I can't possibly describe them all. The themes and symbolism of this movie are incredibly interesting and really thought-provoking. If I had to nitpick, I'd say this movie has a kind of out-of-nowhere climax. I didn't think that was really needed, but that's really all I have to say. I really need to watch more Ghibli movies, because because if this is an indication of their quality, then I'm in for a really good time. And the best part, this was only the second best Japanese movie of last year. Okay, I'm technically cheating here since I didn't see this until 2024, but whatever. I still saw it in theaters, and I really want to talk about it, okay? People went absolutely nuts for this movie, calling it the best Godzilla movie ever. And as someone who's only seen one other Godzilla movie, I can say they're at least partially right. This movie is freaking amazing. For starters, it is an absolutely epic monster movie. The effects on Godzilla are fantastic. I mean, this movie looks better than Godzilla vs. Kong, which I guess isn't too surprising since that had two monsters to deal with, while this is only one. And the cinematography is some of the best I've ever seen. The shots they use to show the size of Godzilla really make him feel larger than life, to the point where he feels like a legitimate threat whenever he shows up. And good God, I got chills whenever he started charging up his atomic breath, because you know something's gonna go down when he fires it. But at the same time, this is a legit, really gripping story. Set shortly after World War II, we follow a disgraced kamikaze pilot named Koichi as he struggles with survivor guilt, not just because of the war, but because of the soldiers that were killed in Godzilla's first attack. He's seen the destructive power this monster is capable of, and you instantly connect with him. And at the same time, he's struggling to care for a young woman named Noriko and an orphan girl named Akiko, both of which are very likable as well, and you really don't want to see anything bad happen to them. Even the side characters are great. Many of them have arcs they go through, and you really care about them, which makes the scenes where Godzilla attacks feel all the more intense. It is rare you have a movie where the dialogue scenes are just as engaging as the monster battle scenes, but this movie succeeded and then some. If I had to nitpick, I think the ending feels like a bit of a cop-out, not the climax, that is legit emotional. I'm talking about the very last thing before the credits. I understand why they did it, and you kinda know it's coming, but I would have preferred at least a little more build-up. The previous scene ends kinda abruptly, and it makes it feel a bit less impactful, but that's really my only issue. The rest of this movie was incredible. I really need to see more Godzilla movies, because this was a perfect way to end the biggest year of movies of my entire life. And there we go, that's every movie I saw in 2023. Even breaking my personal record, there were still some great ones I didn't get a chance to see. Just goes to show that this was a banger year for movies. I don't know if I'll break my record again in 2024, but I am glad I got to see as many as I did. I already know there's at least a few movies coming that I want to check out, so stay tuned for any future reviews. But for now, it's the moment you've all been waiting for, the elusive ranking. At the bottom with number 14, we have Five Nights at Freddy's, number 13 is Wish, number 12, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, number 11, Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken, number 10, Cocaine Bear, number 9, Renfield, number 8, Elemental, number 7, The Super Mario Bros. Movie, number 6, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, number 5, Nimona, number 4, Oppenheimer, number 3, The Boy and the Heron, number 2, Godzilla Minus One, and number 1, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Thank you all for watching, don't let the door hit you on the way out.